My granddaughter looked me in the eye and said, "You don't exist if you're not online." I laughed it off at first, just another teenage quip, I thought. But that night, I couldn't sleep. So I downloaded Instagram for the first time in my life, not to post, just to observe. What I found behind her perfectly filtered world shook me more than any courtroom ever had. I'm a retired attorney, a grandmother, and I thought I knew my family, until I stepped into the digital world and realized how much we'd all stopped seeing each other. It was a Sunday evening in late October, the kind of evening when the air in Maple Glen, Pennsylvania, felt like something ancient and settling, a mix of crisp autumn chill, the dry rustle of fallen leaves, and the distant comforting scent of wood smoke from chimneys beginning their seasonal work. The last vestiges of daylight were clinging to the sky with a kind of golden desperation, but the sun, a reluctant guest these days, had already disappeared behind the horizon by 6 o'clock, pulling the warmth and the bright light with it, leaving the world outside cloaked in a deepening twilight. Inside the house, the air was warm, thick with the comforting, savory aroma of roast chicken and the yeasty promise of rosemary biscuits baking in the oven. I had cooked, of course. I always did on Sundays when Theo brought the family over. It was one of the last remaining rituals we clung to, a fragile anchor in the shifting tides of our lives. The one time of the week, the whole family still sat down together, or at least went through the motions of doing so. My son Theo had picked me up that morning from my apartment on Chestnut Lane, a quiet street lined with mature oak trees, turning fiery colors and houses built in the mid-20th century, solid and unassuming. It was a familiar neighborhood, one I had lived in for decades. First with Arthur, my late husband, then alone after he passed 8 years ago. Arthur, bless him, had been my rock-steady and kind, the quiet counterpoint to my often demanding career. He had celebrated my victories in court, listened patiently to the frustrations of my work, and created a home that was a true sanctuary. His absence had left a chasm one that time had not entirely filled, only softened the edges of. Theo lived on the other side of town near the newer developments, sprawling neighborhoods, where all the houses looked disconcertingly alike, as if they were copy-pasted from a glossy real estate flyer. Clean white siding, black shutters, meticulously manicured, professionally landscaped lawns that seemed to demand constant upkeep. Theo had done well for himself in the world of technology, climbing the corporate ladder. Senior systems analyst or something like that. The exact title was less important to me than the comfortable, sometimes seemingly insulated life it afforded him and his family. A life that felt increasingly distant from my own quieter routine since retiring from law. He didn't talk much about his work anymore, not in any detail. If I asked genuinely curious, he'd just shrug and say, it was boring, stable fine, practical, a means to an end. His wife Julia was a realtor, successful, and always impeccably put together, her blonde hair never out of place, her makeup flawless. She moved through the world with a polished efficiency, always speaking in smooth, confident tones, as if every sentence might become a slogan for a billboard designed to sell you something, whether it was a house or an idea. Their daughter, my granddaughter, was named Tracy. She had just turned 16, navigating that turbulent, confusing, exhilarating, terrifying space between childhood and adulthood. She was a beautiful girl, tall and lean like her father, with my mother's elegant cheekbones and eyes that were quick and intelligent, though often hidden behind a veil of teenage indifference or the glow of a screen. Her hair a color that seemed to shift with her mood, and the latest trends was currently a shade of stormy gray blue. a deliberate statement against conformity. Tracy's smile could, when it was genuine, still light up a room, a sudden flash of warmth that reminded me of the little girl who used to launch herself into my arms. But her eyes often held that particular teenage glaze, half disdain for the mundane world of adults, and their concerns half disinterest in anything that didn't directly involve her or her immediate peers. Everything that fell outside the narrow scope of her online world, her friendships, her burgeoning sense of self, seemed either beneath her notice or simply irrelevant. I remembered that age. I remembered the intensity of feeling the certainty of knowing everything, the desperate hurry for life to begin, the feeling that everything was happening too slow, that the real world was waiting just out of reach, and the one you inhabited was merely a boring, inconvenient placeholder. Dinner was ready by 5:30, the meal a warm, tangible presence laid out on the dining room table. I set the table with care, arranging the silverware, folding the cloth napkins, placing the water glasses just so. While I did this, they sat in the living room, separate but together, each absorbed in the blue glow of their phones. I could hear the faint, constant buzz and ping of notifications, the occasional forced laugh that didn't quite ring true, designed more for the benefit of someone on the other end of a screen than for anyone in the room. I heard the rhythmic swiping of fingers against glass screens, the low murmur of voices speaking into devices. The only sound that belonged to the house itself, that felt rooted in the physical space, and the possibility of a shared moment, was the gentle, insistent ding from the oven. Timer signaling the biscuits were done, a small, warm signal of completion in a room filled with digital distraction. When I called them in my voice, cutting across the low digital hum, they came slowly, reluctantly, their movements conveying a palpable sense of obligation. It was as if the short walk from the living room to the dining room table was a burdensome chore, an unnecessary interruption to their more important, more engaging digital lives. Tracy didn't look up from her phone as she took her seat. She just shifted her thumbs across the screen, her fingers flying across the tiny keyboard with practiced speed, and muttered something under her breath about her story still uploading her attention, still firmly anchored elsewhere. I had placed the roast chicken, golden and fragrant, in a large glass dish at the center of the table, surrounded by glistening roasted carrots and warm buttered rolls. The gravy steamed in its small ceramic bowl, a rich, comforting aroma filling the air. Everything looked the way it always had on these Sunday evenings, the meal a constant in a world of shifting variables, a small island of tradition, but the energy around the table felt different, stretched thin and brittle, like old elastic ready to snap. They passed plates around their movements, automatic, mechanical murmuring, quiet, automatic, thanks. Their eyes often glancing back towards their phones. I tried to make small talk, to weave a thread of conversation into the digital silence that enveloped us to bridge the growing distance. I asked Tracy how school was going, if she was thinking about colleges, yet the traditional expected questions adults ask teenagers grasping for a point of connection. She snorted a short dismissive sound that conveyed volumes about the perceived irrelevance of my query. She said, her eyes still glued to her phone, her tone flat. "Nobody really uses college anymore, Grandma. Not like you think. Not for what matters. Everyone's just building their brand online now." Theo chuckled a short, uncomfortable sound that seemed designed to fill the awkward silence, to diffuse potential tension before it could escalate. Julia gave Tracy that particular look mothers give when they want to correct, to guide, to impart a piece of hard-won wisdom, but are too tired, too preoccupied with their own concerns, or perhaps feel too ill-equipped to bother with the inevitable pushback. The look that says we'll discuss this later, or maybe we won't, just don't make a scene now. Don't disrupt the fragile peace. I felt a flicker of something beneath the surface of my composure, curiosity perhaps, or perhaps a quiet challenge to her assertion about what mattered. "What kind of brand do you mean, Tracy?" I asked, my voice quiet measured. "Like, for a Product A company." She rolled her eyes, then a slow theatrical movement that encompassed the entire table, the roast chicken, the cloth napkins, and the antiquated nature of my question. She finally looked up from her phone, her face illuminated by its cold blue glow, and met my gaze directly for the first time all evening. The phone was still clutched in her hand, her thumb hovering over the screen, a constant vital tether to her world. "Like Instagram, Grandma," she said, her tone patient, but laced with a clear, unmistakable condescension, as if explaining something incredibly basic to someone hopelessly slow. "It's like your online life, your profile, how people see you. You wouldn't get it, though. It's not your world. You don't even have social media, right?" She said it like it was a fundamental lack, a missing limb, a clear indicator of my irrelevance. Like I existed outside the bounds of normal visible human experience because I lacked a presence in the digital realm that to her constituted reality. "No," I said, my voice still quiet, steady, refusing to be drawn into her performance. "I don't. I've never needed it." And then she said it, the sentence that, despite its flippant, tossed-off delivery, landed like a physical blow, a sharp, unexpected crack across the fragile porcelain of my composure. "That's why you're invisible." The words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with unintentional cruelty, or perhaps intentional cruelty masked as a joke, a testing of boundaries. "You don't exist if you're not online." The words hit harder than she intended, I think. Or maybe in that moment she did intend the full weight of them, the brutal honesty of a teenager who believes they have discovered a fundamental truth about the world. Teenagers in their raw honesty and desperate need to define themselves and their world sometimes wield humor and venom in a way that completely blurs the line between them until even they don't know which one they meant to inflict. It was a statement of their world order delivered with the absolute certainty of someone who believed they held the keys to reality. Online visibility was existence. Lacking it meant you were a shadow, a ghost, a non-entity. Julia laughed then, a nervous, brittle little sound that seemed designed to fill the awkward silence, to signal to Tracy that this was just her, being her, a quirky teenage observation, nothing to be taken seriously, nothing that required a parental response or correction, a way to signal that this was something that could be let pass without comment or correction. Theo said nothing. He simply took another bite of chicken, chewed, slowly, deliberately, and reached for the salt shaker. His silence a quiet form of passive agreement, or perhaps just his usual avoidance of conflict, a retreat into the safe world of physical necessity. His daughter's words hung in the air raw and unchallenged. I felt the sting, a sharp intake of breath that I quickly suppressed. I smiled then, or at least I tried to. A muscle in my cheek twitched a small, involuntary movement. I had mastered the art of smiling, without letting it touch my eyes a long time ago, a skill honed in courtrooms, during tense cross-examinations, or when facing hostile witnesses, Moments where composure was paramount, where revealing too much emotion could cost you everything. I looked at Tracy, still holding her phone, her face illuminated by its cold glow, and said, my voice still quiet level, measured, well, perhaps I like being invisible, Tracy. It gives me more time to listen, to watch. She didn't hear me, of course. Or if she did, she didn't register the meaning behind the words. The double entendre. The quiet assertion of a different kind of power. Her attention had already snapped back to her phone, her thumb flying across the screen again, lost in the endless scroll. The blue glow of the screen illuminated her face, washing out her features, making her look more like a ghost than the vibrant, complex girl she was or could be. The rest of the meal passed in a strained, heavy silence, broken only by the mundane sounds of plates scraping against ceramic water glasses, clinking against the table, the rustle of fabric, as someone shifted in their seat. I ate slowly, deliberately, my appetite gone watching them, my family. They were all together in the same room at the same table, sharing the same food I had prepared. And yet no one was truly present with each other. Each of them was tethered to a world elsewhere, a digital space that demanded their attention, their focus, their energy, a world I apparently did not exist in. Tracy left the table first, pushing back her chair abruptly, muttering something about needing to do editing for her online content, her digital brand. I heard her light, quick footsteps climb the stairs, heard her bedroom door close, a definitive sound that sealed her off in her own world, a world I was excluded from. Theo and Julia lingered for a few minutes, making desultory attempts at conversation about local news or upcoming work events, filling the silence with noise, but even they seemed to have run out of things to say to each other to me, in the physical world that now felt secondary. When they finally left the table, pushing back their chairs, their movements were automatic. They thanked me for dinner, but it felt automatic, a perfunctory check, Theo. On a list of social obligations, a script delivered without feeling like my effort in cooking the meal had been expected, a service, provided not something truly appreciated. I cleared the dishes alone, stacking them neatly by the sink, scraping the leftovers, the uneaten chicken, the cold biscuits, into the trash, a quiet echo of Martin from the previous story, but unintentional this time, just the detritus of a meal consumed in distraction. I washed each dish by hand, slowly, methodically, letting the warm water and suds cling to my fingers, a physical sensation, grounding me in the present moment. I let the water run hotter than usual, steam rising in the quiet kitchen. I needed to feel something sharper, something real to cut through the dull ache of embarrassment and dismissal that had settled inside me, chilling me from the inside out. My reflection in the kitchen window looked back at me from the dark glass. In the dim light, I looked older than usual, the lines around my eyes deeper, my face softer, less defined, somehow diminished. I wondered if they really saw me at all anymore, if Tracy had been right. Maybe I had vanished the moment I retired, the moment I stopped keeping up with their fast-paced, ever-changing world. Maybe being physically present at dinner wasn't enough to exist in this new reality. Not for this world. That night when Theo drove me back to my apartment on Chestnut Lane in Burlington, Vermont, where I had moved a few years after Arthur passed, seeking a fresh start in a city I loved, we barely spoke. He had some podcast playing in the car, something about productivity hacks or optimizing financial portfolios. The low murmur of voices filling the space that conversation should have occupied, creating a barrier between us. He pulled up to the curb outside my building, the car idling for a moment, its engine a low rumble. He leaned over and gave me a hug, a quick, perfunctory embrace that felt more like a pat on the back than a connection. Said he'd call next week. He didn't notice, or perhaps he did, and chose not to acknowledge that I held on to the hug a second longer than usual, clinging to the physical contact, a desperate anchor in the digital sea, a small silent plea to be seen. Inside my apartment, I turned on a single lamp in the living room, casting a warm pool of light in the familiar, comforting space. I walked to my bedroom and sat on the edge of my bed. The apartment was quiet still. No buzzing phones, no glowing screens demanding attention, no constant stream of updates and notifications. Just me and the soft, steady hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, a sound of quiet domesticity. I looked at my phone, the same one I'd had for years. A basic flip phone, old-fashioned, reliable, barely used for anything beyond calls and texts. It felt solid and simple in my hand, a relic from a different time. I opened the App Store, a function I had perhaps used twice in my life for a simple game or a weather app. I searched one word Instagram. The icon appeared on the screen, a stylized camera lens in a gradient of colors. For the first time in a very long time, I downloaded something new, something that felt utterly alien to my world, to the life I had chosen. The small progress bar filled slowly, a blue ring circling the icon. And as I sat there alone in the quiet, my phone connecting to a world I didn't inhabit, I felt a shift begin subtle. At first, a quiet turning of a key in a lock I hadn't realized was keeping me out, keeping me invisible. The night after that dinner, the words, "You don't exist if you're not online," echoed in the silent rooms of my apartment in Burlington. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed for hours staring at the ceiling fan as it spun in lazy hypnotic circles, its shadow sweeping across the plaster, a slow dance of light and dark. The air in my apartment felt heavier than usual, as if it had soaked up the silence and the sense of erasure that had followed me home from Maple Glen. Outside, the streets of Burlington, Vermont were quiet, the usual weekend activity, hushed by the late hour. No passing cars disturbed the night. No laughter drifted from neighbors' windows, just the occasional rustling of branches in the wind and the soft rhythmic ticking of the old wall clock above my dresser, measuring out the silent minutes. I kept hearing her voice in my head. Tracy, my granddaughter, 16 years old, navigating that turbulent space between childhood and adulthood, full of fire and arrogance and a brutal, unthinking honesty that cut like a knife. She'd always been sharp-tongued, quicker with a witty retort than a kind word, but something about her tone that evening had sunk into me, deeper than it should have, deeper than any harsh word I had ever received in a courtroom, any professional slight. Maybe it wasn't even her words themselves, the definitions of existence tied to an online profile, a digital footprint. Maybe it was the way no one contradicted her, the way Theo and Julia let it hang in the air like an undeniable truth. Invisible. That's what she said, invisible. Like I didn't exist because I didn't have a digital footprint, a curated online persona for public consumption. Like everything I had done in my life, every complex trial I had argued in court, every dense legal paper I had published, every certificate framed and hung on my office wall, signifying years of work and dedication, every quiet act of kindness. Like all of it had been erased the moment I retired, the moment I stopped chasing trends, the moment I chose a quieter path. It was a complete dismissal of a life lived, of a person I was reduced to a single perceived lack. I got up around midnight, the accumulated stillness of the apartment pressing in on me. My knees popped the way they always did these days, a small familiar sound in the quiet night. My slippers made soft sounds against the wooden floor as I walked into the kitchen, the space cool and dim. I poured myself a glass of water from the tap, the sound loud in the stillness. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Arthur and I had shared countless meals, where I had proofed countless legal briefs, where I had comforted Clara when she was a girl, and stared at my phone sitting on the worn Formica surface. It was an old model. Nothing fancy. No slick touchscreen interfaces that responded to a fingertips ballet. No endless array of apps and widgets demanding attention. Just calls, texts, a basic camera, the weather forecast, and the occasional blurry photo I had taken of a bird on my windowsill, or the first snow falling. It felt like a relic from a different age. It wasn't that I didn't know how to use modern technology. I had used computers for legal research, navigated complex databases, sent emails and digital files for years. I understood the mechanics, if not the culture. I had simply chosen not to engage with this new world of social media, of constant updates and curated lives. For years, I had told myself it was unnecessary, frivolous, a waste of time and energy I could better spend reading, gardening, knitting. I had convinced myself that I didn't need to be part of that world, that I had earned the right to live quietly, privately, deliberately offline after years of public life in the courtroom, constantly under scrutiny. But Tracy's words, delivered with such casual certainty, with the weight of her parents' silent assent, had pierced through my carefully constructed justification. She made me question something I hadn't questioned in a long time. Whether by opting out, by choosing invisibility, I had in fact made myself irrelevant to the people who mattered most to me. I tapped the screen of my phone. The sudden bright light felt harsh in the dark kitchen, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, the quiet accumulation of undisturbed life. I opened the App Store again. I typed slowly each letter, deliberate each tap, a small act of reluctant necessity, a step across a threshold I had long avoided. I typed Instagram into the search bar and let the words sit there for a moment, a digital challenge, a symbol of the world that had deemed me obsolete before I hit the download button. A blue ring appeared on the screen, circling slowly, as the application loaded, connecting my small, quiet phone to a vast, noisy world I didn't understand. I sat there in the silence, my hand resting flat on the table. My heart oddly unsettled, a fluttery nervousness I hadn't felt before arguing a major case in front of a judge and jury. When it finished installing the icon appearing on my screen, a vibrant, colorful square, I hesitated for a long moment. Then, drawing a deep breath, I tapped it. The app opened. A splash screen, bright and welcoming, asking me to sign up to create a presence. It asked for a name, a photo, a bio. I skipped them all. My purpose wasn't to join, and not in the way they understood it. My purpose was to observe. I just wanted to see. I created a blank account, choosing a throwaway username, a random string of letters and numbers that held no meaning, no identity. I uploaded no photo, wrote no bio. I followed no one, not at first. The interface confused me. Immediately, stories, reels, feeds, explore pages. It felt like stepping into a crowded, chaotic mall, where everyone was shouting at once, vying for attention, for space, for recognition. A sensory overload after the quiet of my own life. The layout seemed illogical, unintuitive, driven by algorithms I didn't understand. But I was a lawyer. I was used to dissecting complex systems, finding the underlying logic no matter how obscured by jargon or procedure. I started tapping, swiping, exploring, navigating this strange new landscape with a lawyer's methodical curiosity. I used the search function and typed Tracy's name, her full name, and there she was. Her profile picture carefully posed a professional-looking headshot. Her username catchy and modern, incorporating her name. Her profile was public. Of course it was. She wanted to be seen, to be followed, to build that brand, that online existence. Her bio was a jumble of emojis that seemed meaningless to me. Song lyrics that felt both overly dramatic and utterly irrelevant to the person I knew, and a link to something called a Finsta. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but the term itself sounded intriguing, secretive. I made a mental notebook, theoing the term to look up later, recognizing it as potentially a key to a deeper level of her online life. I started scrolling through her public photos. There were so many, a relentless stream of carefully curated images, each one seemingly designed for maximum impact and validation. Posed selfies with perfect lighting that seemed to erase any trace of imperfection, presenting a flawless mask to the world. Beach shots with friends, all filtered sunshine and effortless beauty capturing idealized moments. Mirror pics taken in her bedroom. Her skin smoothed her eyes, enhanced her captions, highlighted with trending words and phrases. She looked older than she was in these photos. Not in the way of wrinkles or weariness, but in posture and gaze, in a manufactured confidence. Like she was performing a version of herself she hadn't actually grown into, yet a role she was trying on for size, projecting it out into the world. The comments beneath the photos were a different language entirely, a constant stream of affirmation, a sea of shallow validation. Boys calling her fire, goals, unreal, using emojis like girls telling her she looked amazing, a cascade of compliments and digital accolades. It felt empty, a constant performance fueled by external approval. I kept scrolling, going further and further back in her feed. A digital archaeologist digging through layers of curated self-presentation. The deeper I went, the less I recognized the girl in the pictures as the granddaughter who used to curl up in my lap with picture books or ask me about constellations in the night sky. It wasn't that she was posting things that were overtly dangerous, not yet. Not obviously, not on this public profile. But they were careless. Poses that felt too mature, too provocative for her age phrases in her captions, that hinted at experiences she shouldn't be having, a knowledge of the world that felt premature and perhaps dangerous. And I could see clearly how she was building a persona, someone louder, riskier, edgier than the Tracy, who sometimes still came over on Sundays. And then I found the Finsta. I had to search for it manually using the term I'd looked up. It stood for fake Instagram. I learned a secondary private account where users felt free to post more authentically, more recklessly, for a select trusted audience. It wasn't linked directly from her main profile anymore, perhaps hidden deliberately, but using the username pattern I'd observed on her main account, and recalling the inside joke she'd mentioned, it didn't take long to find. The username was a twist on that joke, a phrase that held meaning only if you knew her offline. The profile photo was blurry, deliberately obscured, designed not to be easily identifiable, the name untagged. But I knew with a chilling certainty that settled deep in my stomach that it was her. This account was private, unlike the public one you had to request to follow. Access was restricted. This felt different, more invasive, stepping across a more significant boundary. But the fear that had prompted me to download the app in the first place, the fear for the girl behind the curated mask, outweighed my hesitation, my ingrained respect for privacy. My lawyer's mind argued that privacy is paramount, but a grandmother's heart countered that safety was more so. I tapped request to follow. I didn't expect her to accept. She would vet requests carefully, surely only letting in close friends, people she trusted with her unfiltered self. But 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a notification. Tracy Hayes has accepted your follow request. She probably thought I was a bot account generated by the platform, or maybe a random kid from school with a username she didn't recognize, just another number to boost her follow account on an account meant for a limited audience. She didn't question it. She just accepted the request without a second thought. And what I found in that private space, that digital backstage area, made my chest tighten with a cold, hard knot of dread. The Finsta was raw, unfiltered, and deeply concerning. It was a window into a world she was inhabiting that felt dangerous and uncontrolled. Photos at parties I didn't know she attended, dimly lit rooms filled with teenagers and red Solo cups, the universal symbol for underage drinking. Blatant and unapologetic. Videos where the camera swung wildly, capturing snippets of reckless behavior. Dancing on tables, shouting lyrics, to loud music gestures that felt provocative. Drinks in red Solo cups held aloft in toasts to unseen events. Boys, many of them looking older. Their faces often red-eyed, their smiles, smirking their presence in her life a source of growing unease for me. One boy in particular, older than the others, his features blurred by motion or poor lighting, kept appearing in the background of her posts. His arms slung casually over her shoulder, his presence a constant unsettling factor. He didn't look like someone who belonged in a high school, and she didn't look like someone who wanted to be in one anymore. Her online persona pulling her towards a prematurely adult world. Posts where she openly mocked classmates by name, sometimes tagging them directly in cruel memes or circulating unflattering photos taken without their consent. Comments that danced on the edge of outright bullying, if not tipping all the way in sharp words, exchanged like playful banter, but with a clear edge of malice. She shared blurry videos from dimly lit basements or crowded house parties, the music so loud it distorted the phone's speakers, the visuals chaotic and unsettling. Her language was meaner here, coarser, filled with profanity and sarcasm. Her smile in the photos felt more forced, less genuine than even the curated smiles on her main account. The captions weren't clever or aspirational. They were sad, insecure, full of self-deprecation one moment and bravado the next, clawing for attention, for validation, for a reaction, any reaction from her chosen audience. Underneath the bravado, the performance of rebellion, I saw pain. I saw loneliness. I saw desperation. I saw a girl reaching out in the dark, but in ways that were self-destructive and harmful to others. I sat there for nearly an hour, perched on the edge of my bed, in the quiet of my apartment, the only light in the room coming from the glowing screen, scrolling, reading, absorbing the disturbing reality of her hidden online life. I took screenshot after screenshot, saving images, capturing videos, documenting comments, and direct messages. I was saving things I wasn't sure why I needed to save, driven by an instinct both protective and analytical. Maybe to understand, maybe to protect her, maybe to protect others she was targeting with her online cruelty. Maybe just because I felt a lawyer's ingrained instinct to document, to preserve evidence of a truth that was unfolding a truth hidden behind a private account, but terrifyingly visible to anyone granted entry. By the time I finally closed the app and placed the phone down, the sky outside my window was starting to turn that pale pre-dawn gray-blue. The birds were just beginning to stir their first tentative songs, breaking the silence of the early morning. I placed the phone face down on the nightstand and closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. My mind was racing, filled with images and captions and a profound sense of fear for the girl I loved. I wasn't invisible anymore, not to myself. I had entered their world, the world where existence was measured in likes and followers and carefully constructed brands. And I had found a reality there that I had no intention of ignoring. I had no intention of leaving her there alone, navigating those treacherous waters without a compass. I spent the next week gathering, not evidence for a court case this time, not building a file against an adversary, but collecting fragments of a digital life I didn't fully understand, but felt compelled to preserve to understand. I didn't rush. I moved slowly, methodically, like a woman sorting through old boxes in the attic of a life that had been hidden away, uncovering forgotten truths, pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. Each night after the sun slipped behind the trees in Portland, Maine, where I had relocated my apartment temporarily for a change of scene and perspective, letting the cold settle in through the old window panes, deepening the shadows in the corners of the room, I would make myself a cup of chamomile tea, its warmth a small comfort. I would wrap a blanket around my shoulders, settling into my armchair, and open the Instagram app again, entering the world of Tracy's making. It was late 2024 now, the year drawing to a close, but the glow of that screen felt less like a modern convenience and more like a portal to something timeless and dangerous, a place where memory could be edited, curated, or erased entirely, where reality could be twisted and filtered, and where truth could be buried deep beneath layers of performance and trending audios. Tracy, my granddaughter, seemed to have no idea I was watching. No idea that her new follower, the anonymous string of letters and numbers, was her grandmother. In her eagerness to be seen by the world, by strangers, by the boys she sought attention from, she had made herself utterly transparent to me, the quiet, unseen observer in the digital shadows. She posted every day, sometimes twice, sometimes more, a constant, almost frantic stream of updates, photos, videos, thoughts, feelings broadcast to her chosen audience on both accounts. I began documenting each post with the meticulousness of an archivist building a collection of historical records. Screenshots were taken, categorized, stored into neatly labeled folders on my laptop. I titled them plainly without judgment, as I would label evidence, posts, stories, comments, messages. I didn't just save images. I saved conversations in the comment sections, direct messages she exchanged with others, usernames involved timestamps, the digital metadata that painted a fuller picture of her online interactions and the world she inhabited. I was saving evidence of a life being lived or perhaps performed online. What disturbed me most wasn't always the explicit content itself, although some of it made my stomach tighten with fear and concern for her safety and well-being. It was the consistency, the sheer volume, the relentless, almost compulsive way she had built an alternate self through curated chaos and unfiltered glimpses. She'd created a second life online, a persona that seemed to exist solely in the digital realm, separate from the physical world where nothing seemed to matter but attention, likes, reactions, and replies. Her real self, the girl who once asked me to help her make pancakes on Saturday mornings, whose hand felt small and trusting in mine, who cried genuinely when she scraped her knee falling off her bike, who believed in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. That girl seemed nowhere to be found in this online world of posed perfection and reckless abandon. On her main public account, Tracy was polished, perfected a carefully constructed brand, all sunshine and sparkle-filtered sunsets, and pastel tones, carefully cropped smiles poses that made her look older than she was trying on a manufactured maturity. I saw her in expensive-looking designer hoodies, tight jeans, glossy, pouting lips. She spoke in captions written like self-help mantras or aspirational affirmations, words lifted from popular culture. Vibes only, living my truth, no bad days. It was a performance slick and convincing to those who didn't know her, those who saw only the surface. But I saw through all of it, the carefully constructed facade that hid a more troubled reality. But on the private account, the Finsta, it was a different world entirely. There, the mask came off, or perhaps a different, more troubling mask went on, revealing not authenticity, but a different kind of performance, one designed for a more select, more jaded audience. There she cursed freely, her language sharp and cynical. She posted photos and videos with red Solo cups, implying underage drinking was a regular occurrence, almost a rite of passage. She openly mocked classmates by name sometimes, tagging them directly in cruel memes or circulating unflattering photos taken without their consent. Comments exchanged with friends often danced on the edge of outright bullying, if not tipping all the way in sharp words exchanged like playful banter, but with a clear edge of malice. She shared blurry videos from dimly lit basements or crowded house parties. The music so loud it distorted the phone's speakers, the visuals chaotic and unsettling. There were boys, many of them looking older, their faces often red-eyed, their smiles smirking their presence in her life, a source of growing unease and fear for me. One boy in particular, older than the others, his features blurred by motion or poor lighting, kept appearing in the background of her posts. His arm slung casually over her shoulder, his presence a constant unsettling factor that spoke of boundaries being crossed. He didn't look like someone who belonged in a high school, and she didn't look like someone who wanted to be in one anymore, her online persona pulling her towards a prematurely adult world away from the safety of childhood. I saw her take risks that terrified me, glimpses of behavior that felt genuinely dangerous, moments where her judgment seemed completely absent, overridden by the need for attention or the influence of others. I saw her comment under someone else's post with cruel emojis and a thinly veiled insult aimed at a mutual acquaintance, a casual act of digital aggression. I saw her post screenshots of private group chats, sharing conversations meant to be confidential, laughing about people she called friends, exposing their vulnerabilities for online validation, a betrayal of trust that seemed to cause her no hesitation. It wasn't just typical teenage immaturity or rebellion, the kind I remembered navigating myself or helping Clara navigate years ago. It felt calculated, a performance, yes, but one that involved real-world consequences for her and for others. It was a public dismantling of her own boundaries and a casual disregard for the feelings and privacy of those around her, fueled by the constant demand for content, for attention, for validation. I tried desperately not to judge to understand the immense pressures she faced from peers from the platform itself, the desperate desire for acceptance the performance demanded by the medium. But I couldn't lie to myself. It hurt to see this side of her, this emerging cruelty and recklessness, and it scared me deeply. I saw a girl who was slipping inch by inch, post by post, into a digital version of herself that had no boundaries, no filter, and seemingly no concern for consequence for her own safety or the impact of her actions on others. And I couldn't shake the question that haunted me most, the question that returned to me in the quiet of the night. Where were her parents in all this? Theo and Julia weren't oblivious, I was sure of that. They couldn't be entirely unaware of the amount of time she spent online, of the changes in her behavior, her mood. But they were distracted, deeply, profoundly distracted. Julia was always running around juggling open houses and staging projects, her focus consumed by her career, by maintaining the perfect image of their successful lives. Theo stayed late at the office most nights, claiming it was a particularly demanding crunch season, though I suspected with a mother's intuition, honed over decades, that he just wanted the quiet, the predictable structure of work after the unpredictable chaos of his family life. They were physically present, providing a home food clothes, material comforts, but their attention seemed elsewhere absorbed by their own pressures, their own screens, their own fatigue. Tracy had mastered the art of invisibility, not by disappearing from their lives, but by overwhelming them with a digital presence so loud, so constant, so seemingly all-consuming online, that no one in her immediate vicinity seemed to bother looking, beneath the noise, beneath the performance, to see what was really happening, to see the girl beneath the brand. One night, scrolling through her Finsta stories, those fleeting glimpses that disappeared after 24 hours unless you saved them, I found a video clip that made me freeze my blood running cold, despite the blanket wrapped around me. It was short, maybe 15 seconds, shot vertically on her phone, shaky and chaotic. She was in a car, clearly not driving, but laughing loudly, a little too loudly. There was laughter in the background, muffled music playing. Her face filled the screen close up, eyes wide, a forced smile fixed on her lips. She was wearing lipstick far too dark for her skin tone, smeared slightly, as if she'd forgotten it was there. Her pupils were too wide, blown out, reflecting the screen light unmistakable signs of intoxication. In the corner of the video, held up briefly by another hand, a bottle flashed the label, unreadable, in the poor light. But the context, the wide pupils, the laughter, the setting, it spoke volumes. Then the video cut off abruptly. A fleeting moment, easily missed if you weren't looking closely, if you weren't looking for it. But I saw enough. My lawyer's instinct kicked in, overriding the grandmother's fear for a moment. I took a screenshot of the bottle, saved the video clip quickly before it disappeared. I named the file plainly, chillingly, driving. It joined dozens of others in the folder on my laptop, a folder that had grown heavier and heavier with each passing night of my quiet surveillance, a digital archive of her recklessness. It wasn't just about what she was doing in those moments. It was about what she was documenting, what she was broadcasting, what she was sharing with the world, or her chosen corner of it. She didn't think twice. She posted recklessly, impulsively, without considering the implications, forgetting that everything on the internet once posted is permanent, that eyes might be watching, that nothing truly disappears. And maybe that was what haunted me most, more than the drinking or the parties or the cruelty she displayed, that she didn't understand the value of privacy, The importance of holding parts of yourself sacred, protecting what's real and vulnerable, leaving something unsaid, something not shared with the world, something not subject to the judgment or consumption of others. In my world, the things that mattered most, love, grief, quiet joys, difficult struggles, moments of true connection, lived off the record in the privacy of hearts and homes. In hers, nothing seemed to matter unless it was documented, curated, broadcast, validated by others online. I began keeping a handwritten log alongside the digital archive. Old habits die hard, and the physical act of writing gave me a sense of control of reality in a world designed to take it away. A yellow legal pad, the kind I had used for notes in court, lay open on my kitchen table filled with neat bullet points, written in black ink. Date, time, platform, type of post, photo, video story, a brief description of the content, direct quotes or captions, usernames involved, a note on the action taken screenshot, saved video. My handwriting was slow and steady, deliberate, a physical counterpoint to the frantic energy of the digital world I was observing. It gave me a sense of order amidst the chaos. I wasn't doing this to punish her. At least that's what I told myself late at night, as I filled the pages, the only sound the scratching of my pen. I wasn't trying to build a case against her, not in a legal sense, not to destroy anything. I just couldn't look away. I couldn't ignore what I saw, pretending it wasn't happening, hoping it would just go away. Because if I stayed silent, if I let it all slide past me, if I remained invisible, then I would be just as complicit as the strangers who double-tapped her chaos and moved on, just as complicit as the parents who weren't watching, weren't seeing. And maybe deep down, beneath the fear and the concern, I was also preserving something else. Not just evidence of her recklessness, but proof of the girl I had once known, a reminder of the person she was before the digital world began to reshape her. Or maybe terrifyingly proof of the one she was becoming, a record of her transformation. Each night I sat in that quiet kitchen in my apartment in Portland, Maine. The light dim above me, the house silent around me, and I watched her build a version of herself online that felt increasingly fragile, increasingly unsustainable. A performance that couldn't last without collapsing under its own weight. And with every screenshot saved, every note added to the legal pad, I wondered how far she would go, how much she would risk before something finally broke, before she hit rock bottom. And whether I was the one who would have to break it, who would have to force the moment of truth, the confrontation with reality. The waiting was agonizing, the watching a heavy burden, a lonely vigil. By the second week of November, the trees in Providence, Rhode Island, where I had moved again seeking a fresh perspective in a city rich with history and old architecture, had lost most of their leaves. The sidewalks were littered with brittle remnants of color crunching underfoot during my morning walks. The sky hung low and gray, promising early snow that hadn't arrived yet, the air damp and cold. I bundled myself in my coat and walked to the local Theoet every morning, just to breathe air that wasn't filtered through LED screens and Bluetooth devices, air that smelled of damp earth and approaching winter, of things real and tangible. It gave me time to think, time to process what I was doing, what I was becoming myself. A digital archivist, a silent observer in my granddaughter's hidden world, a grandmother turned reluctant investigator. I wasn't sure when concern had turned into strategy. It wasn't a single moment of epiphany, a sudden decision. It was a slow drip, an accumulation of unease and fear that reached a tipping point. One image at a time, one story at a time, one cruel comment at a time, The weight of it grew until it became unbearable. I hadn't planned to intervene this way. I truly hadn't. My initial thought, the conventional one, was to talk to Theo and Julia to show them what I had found to enlist their help. But after nights of watching Tracy post pieces of herself, she might never get back pieces of her reputation, her safety, her innocence. Broadcasting them carelessly to the world, I knew. I couldn't keep sitting on the sidelines, documenting in silence, like I had been doing for the past year since that dinner. It wasn't enough. I had to do something. But I also knew with the certainty of someone who had spent years negotiating human behavior in high-stakes situations in courtrooms and negotiation tables, that saying something directly, just speaking words of warning or disappointment, would never work with Tracy. She didn't listen to lectures. She tuned them out with practiced ease, a skill honed over years of parental well-meaning advice. She didn't respond to warnings. She rebelled against them, seeing them as challenges to her independence. If anything, confrontation, direct accusations would only make her defensive, make her retreat further behind her digital walls, make her perform louder, act out, more recklessly in defiance, proving she couldn't be controlled. It wasn't that she didn't care about the truth, perhaps. It was that she didn't believe it applied to her online life, that the rules of the real world didn't extend into the digital one, where she felt she controlled the narrative, where she could be anyone she wanted. So I began to plan, slowly, carefully, drawing on the strategic thinking of my legal career, the years spent building cases, finding leverage, anticipating reactions. The first step was getting myself off the sidelines, out of the shadows of the anonymous account. I deleted the blank account I had been using to watch. It had served its purpose, allowing me entry into her world without being seen. But I was tired of hiding even in a digital shadow of numbers and silence. I needed to be present, visible, even if just in a small, carefully chosen corner of that vast online world. My existence needed to be acknowledged by myself, and perhaps eventually by them. I made a new account. This time it was mine. Real photo, real name. I uploaded an old picture of me in my garden from a few years back, taken one sunny afternoon when Arthur was still with me. A photo he had taken. My hands were in the dirt sleeves, rolled up a smudge of soil on my cheek, smiling at something off camera, perhaps a bird or a particularly vibrant bloom. It felt like a true reflection of a part of me that was grounded, real, connected to life. The caption I wrote was, "Simple, honest, a statement of purpose. Back to the roots, finding joy in the tangible world." I used my full name, Margaret L. Hart. No initials, no cryptic username games, no hiding who I was. I followed no one. I wasn't there to consume content or build a network. I was there to exist, authentically, visibly. I wanted them to come to me to find me, if they chose to. I started posting daily, slowly, building a presence, an alternative narrative to the one Tracy inhabited. Not selfies, not posed images, meant to attract attention, but things that reflected who I was, what I valued, the quiet, rich life I lived outside the digital sphere. A picture of a worn casebook I used to teach from at the law school, its pages yellowed with age. A short video of me making pie crust from scratch my hands, working the flour and butter, the simple magic of transformation. A photo of the imposing stone steps of the courthouse I had climbed almost every morning for 12 years as a prosecutor. A silent testament to a different kind of public life, a life dedicated to seeking a different kind of justice. The responses were slow at first, a trickle of connection. polite likes from distant relatives who somehow found the account. A few comments from retired colleagues who recognized my name and photo, expressing pleasant surprise at finding me online. But eventually I knew Tracy saw it. The algorithm, or perhaps a friend, or perhaps her own curiosity, had led her to my profile. I could tell. Her patterns changed. She made fewer posts that week, her usual relentless online output slowing. Her stories were shorter, less frequent, less wild. Her captions seemed quieter, less performative, less desperate. She didn't say anything, didn't interact, but I could feel her attention shift, a subtle disturbance in the digital force field she inhabited. I had disrupted the narrative she built simply by existing outside it, by presenting an alternative kind of online presence, one rooted in reality, in quiet authenticity, not performance. Then came the second part of the plan, curating the message. I sorted through the hundreds of screenshots I had saved, the video clips, the damning comments from her Finsta. I selected the ones that said the most with the least, the ones that illustrated the core issues. The cruelty, the recklessness, the performative danger she embraced. These weren't the most scandalous posts, the ones that hinted at true danger, not yet those I kept private. But these were representative, illustrating her casual cruelty towards others, her dishonesty about her own actions, her disregard for her own safety, and boundaries, the gap between the curated self and the chaotic reality. I wasn't looking to shame her publicly, for the sake of shaming to destroy her reputation in front of her peers. I was looking to hold up a mirror, a reflection she couldn't easily dismiss, or filter away a confrontation delivered indirectly, but powerfully. I wrote a caption for the post. I would create a post that would combine these images. I wrote it and I rewrote it 20 times, agonizing over each word, each phrase. It had to say just enough, carry the weight of my concern and disappointment without being overly long or overtly accusatory. Not too much, not too little. I didn't want to destroy her reputation, to unleash a mob on her. I just wanted to stop her, to make her pause, to force her to see. Before she destroyed herself, I finally settled on a short, deliberate statement, a comment on the nature of the platform she inhabited. We become what we post. Every word, every gesture, every joke we make in public says more than we realize. Maybe it's time someone said it back. It was a comment on the nature of online life, on the public self. But for anyone who knew me, who knew Tracy, who knew our story, or parts of it, the context would be painfully clear. The images would speak for themselves, framed by my quiet words. I scheduled the post. I used an app for that, something Theo had shown me once, a tool from the digital world I was now navigating, turning its own mechanisms against its pervasive culture. I set it to go live on a Friday evening right before dinner, a time when most teenagers were scrolling through their phones, trying to find plans or validation, when parents were tired from the week and perhaps less attentive. It felt like the perfect time to drop a pebble into the digital pond and let the ripples spread to introduce a note of discord into the carefully orchestrated online harmony. The third part of the plan was preparing for the aftermath. I knew there would be a reaction, perhaps a backlash, confusion from those who didn't understand my purpose, denial and anger from Tracy, from Theo, and Julia. Maybe even fear from Tracy when she saw her hidden world exposed, even in this limited, symbolic way. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I had spent too much time letting fear keep me quiet, keep me in the background, keep me invisible, afraid to lose my connection with Tracy. afraid to seem out of touch, an interfering old woman, afraid to be the one who took away her perceived freedom, her control over her narrative. But the truth was, she didn't know what real freedom was. Not the kind that comes from self-possession and responsibility, from living a life of integrity online and off. I drafted a letter to Theo and Julia, a physical letter written in my own hand, sealed in an envelope. I poured out everything into that letter. The anonymous account, the sleepless nights of watching the depth of what I had seen on her Finsta, my profound fears for her safety and well-being, the specific posts I had chosen to highlight why I had decided to post them publicly or semi-publicly, to my small network and potentially theirs, how I had reached the point where silence felt more dangerous, more harmful to Tracy than intervention, painful as it might be. It was raw, honest, laying bare my actions and my motivations, my love and my fear. I didn't plan to send it immediately unless I needed to, unless they reached out to me with confusion or anger that required a full detailed explanation. But I wanted it ready, written plainly, adult to adult, attempting to bypass the usual defenses, the distractions, the avoidance. The last part of the plan was prayer, not the formal kind you do with hands folded in church pews, the kind you learn in Sunday school and recite by rote, but the kind you whisper in the dark when you're not sure if you're doing the right thing, when the moral landscape is unclear. But every cell in your body screams that staying silent, doing nothing, allowing this self-destruction to continue unchecked is no longer love. I didn't pray for her to be punished, for her to face public humiliation. I didn't pray for her to be shamed. I prayed for her to wake up for the intervention. Painful as it might be to land, not as destruction, but as a chance for clarity, for a pause, for a moment of seeing herself as others saw her, for seeing the space between the reckless performing person she was pretending to be online and the thoughtful, kind person she still had time to become. On the day before the post was scheduled to go live a Friday, I baked cookies not because anyone was coming over, but because I needed the house to smell like something good, something real, something comforting and familiar amidst the rising tension. I played Billie Holiday on vinyl, her melancholic, beautiful voice filling the rooms, a soundtrack to my quiet, deliberate preparation. I watered my houseplants, their green leaves, a vibrant reminder of life and growth that happens quietly, steadily outside the spotlight. I ironed napkins I didn't plan to use for any specific meal, finding a soothing rhythm in the mundane task, the feel of the warm iron, the crisp fabric. I lived my day like it was any other, deliberately, mindfully trying to anchor myself in the present moment, in the tangible world, because I wanted to be fully present, to remember who I was before the storm hit, just in case everything changed tomorrow. It was early evening in Asheville, North Carolina, where I was living at the time, a place known for its vibrant art scene and surrounding natural beauty nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The light had turned that particular ethereal shade of gold that only lasts for 10 minutes before the sky folds into dusk, a beautiful fleeting moment that always caught my breath. The town moved slower this time of year. Mid-November, just before the real cold, set in just before the holiday rush began in earnest. I could hear the wind brushing against the old oak tree outside my window, its dry leaves whispering against the glass, a sound like secrets being shared. And in the kitchen, the kettle began its soft, insistent whine, signaling the water was ready for my tea, a small domestic sound in the rising tension. I turned off the burner and poured the hot water over the chamomile tea bag in my mug, letting the sweet, calming scent rise, trying to quiet the nervous fluttering in my chest, the tightness in my throat. Though nothing in my body felt truly calm, my hands were steady as I held the mug, but my pulse felt amplified, a rapid drumbeat in my ears. The post was scheduled for 6:00 p.m. sharp. I had checked it twice that day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, ensuring everything was set, the images cropped, just so framed by the simple black background the caption loaded correctly. The caption had taken me hours to settle on each word weighed, considered its potential impact measured. I didn't want it to sound bitter or vengeful. I didn't want it to be a scold or a public shaming. I wanted it to reflect weight, consequence, observation, not a warning, but a reflection of the reality she had created, bounced back to her. I had finally decided on, we become what we post. Every word, every gesture, every joke we make in public says more than we realize. Maybe it's time someone said it back. The account was under my real name, Margaret L. Hart. No initials, no cryptic username games, no hiding who I was. I didn't tag Tracy. I didn't use hashtags related to her school or town. I didn't direct it toward anyone specific in the public forum, but I knew exactly who it was for, and I knew exactly who would see it eventually. And that was enough. I sat at the dining table, the phone screen, dark resting in front of me, like a closed door. A portal waiting to be opened, a message waiting to be sent into the ether. The house was quiet around me, the silence deep expectant. No television, no music, playing just the soft hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the faint, familiar creak of the wooden floor beneath my slippers as I shifted my weight. Outside, the last of the daylight slipped behind the hills, leaving the sky a bruised purple. I could see porch lights beginning to flicker on up the street, small beacons in the gathering darkness. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the rhythmic sound of someone raking leaves, the scrape, a soothing contrast to my internal turmoil. Somewhere a family was sitting down to dinner, perhaps setting a table, passing plates, living a life indifferent to the digital drama unfolding elsewhere. And then at exactly 6:00 p.m., the notification lit up on my phone screen. Your post is now live. I didn't touch the phone. I let it sit there dark and silent once more on the table. I reached instead for my tea, lifted the warm mug to my lips, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The steam curled upward, warming my cheeks, smelling faintly of honey and calm. I breathed deeply, trying to anchor myself in the physical moment, in the taste of the tea, the feel of the mug, the solid wood of the table. I waited. It didn't take long. By 6:07, I heard the first vibration of my phone against the table. A soft buzz, then another and another, a quiet, persistent buzzing that quickly grew in intensity. The phone pulsed gently across the table like a nervous heartbeat, gathering speed, demanding attention. By 6:12, it buzzed continuously, a steady, insistent rhythm, a tiny engine of digital communication. I reached for it then, not to check comments or likes or shares. Not yet, I wasn't ready for that. I reached for it simply to silence the notifications, to mute the immediate noise. I slid the physical switch on the side of the phone, turning off the sound, and placed the phone back on the table. I folded my hands in my lap and closed my eyes for a moment, focusing on the taste of the tea, the feel of the chair beneath me, the quiet weight of the air in the room. At 6:17, a new sound cut through the quiet, a text message alert distinct from the silent vibrations. I glanced at the screen, illuminated once more. Julia Tracy's mother. Just 2 words. What's this? I didn't answer. Not yet. I wasn't ready for the conversation, the accusations, the defense. At 6:23, another message, this time from an unknown number. A classmate of Tracy's, perhaps, or a parent who had seen the post and recognized the implications the person in the images. I didn't open it. I wasn't ready for the feedback, the reactions, the fallout from the wider world. I had done what I came to do. I had spoken not with my voice, but with a carefully constructed message delivered through the medium they understood. The rest was theirs to process, to react to understand or misunderstand. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back, slightly peering out into the evening. The street outside looked no different than it had an hour ago. The air had cooled further, the last of the daylight gone. A man jogged past in a sweatshirt, earphones in his face, illuminated by the streetlights. A dog barked in the distance, a lonely sound carrying on the wind. Everything looked the same on the surface, but I knew, with a quiet certainty, that the world inside their screens, the world that held so much sway over their reality, had already started to shift. The pebble had landed. The ripples were spreading. At 6:30, the phone began ringing a loud, insistent sound, even on vibrate. I recognized the number. Theo, my son. His name and photo flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again almost immediately. I declined the call, sending it to voicemail again. He called a third time, and I didn't hesitate this time. I turned the phone off entirely. Not out of defiance, not out of cowardice, but out of preservation. I needed space. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space to prepare myself for the storm I had unleashed. There would be time for conversation later, time for explanations, for accusations, for sorting through the mess. Right now, I needed quiet. I moved back to the kitchen, retrieved a slice of the apple tart I had baked the day before, its familiar scent comforting. It sat under a glass dome on the counter, looking solid and real. I cut a generous piece and carried it back to the dining table, sitting down again in the quiet space. I ate slowly, without rush, without distraction, focusing on the taste, the tartness of the apples, the warmth of the cinnamon and brown sugar, the buttery flakiness of the crust that melted just right on my tongue. It was the kind of dessert Tracy used to beg me to make when she was little, her face lighting up at the sight of it, the kind she now pretended not to like, because it wasn't trendy enough, not Insta-worthy. I thought about her face when she saw the post. I imagined the moment it popped up in her feed, amidst the endless scroll of curated perfection and performative chaos. I imagined the way her fingers must have frozen mid-scroll, her thumb hovering over the screen, her online world colliding brutally with a reality she had ignored. The way her stomach must have turned a sick, cold lurch when she recognized the images, her own words, her own actions, uncurated, unfiltered, staring back at her from my profile. She had posted them so carelessly, so freely, believing they existed only for a select few, a private audience who understood the joke, who wouldn't judge, believing no one who mattered, no one who had real authority or consequence in her life would ever see. But she forgot that I was still watching, not because I wanted to catch her, to trap her, but because I wanted to understand, to see the reality she was creating for herself, to intervene before it was too late. By 7:15, I turned the phone back on. It immediately buzzed with the backlog of notifications, a frantic chorus of digital alerts. 17 missed calls, all from Theo and Julia. Dozens of texts from them and unknown numbers. My Instagram account, which had a handful of followers that morning, relatives and old colleagues, had doubled, tripled, quadrupled in followers in just over an hour. Strangers were sharing the post, reposting it, adding their own comments and interpretations. Some praised it, called it brave and necessary truth in a world of fake online lives. Some questioned it, called it cruel and overreach, a public shaming of a child. A few thanked me, said they wished their own parents or grandparents had the courage to speak up the way I had about similar situations with their own children or grandchildren. I looked at the screen, a silent maelstrom of digital activity centered around the quiet action I had taken from my kitchen table. I didn't respond to any of the messages or comments. I wasn't seeking validation or engaging in debate. Instead, I opened the app again, went to my profile, and posted a second time. This time, it was just words on a simple black background, a statement designed perhaps to clarify my intention or simply to state my position before I retreated from the immediate digital noise. Sometimes love means not looking away. It read, no images, no screenshots, just that single sentence, a quiet explanation, a statement of my difficult, painful choice. Then I logged off the account. I closed the app, entirely removed it from my home screen, and placed my phone in the drawer by the sink, next to the yellow legal pad, filled with notes on Tracy's online life. I wasn't done with the world, but I was done with the immediate, noisy, public aftermath of my action. I moved to the small sewing room, sat down at my sewing machine, a familiar, comforting presence, its metal body cool, beneath my hand. I picked up the patchwork quilt I'd been meaning to finish for weeks, the colorful squares of fabric, a tangible, ordered reality. My fingers found their rhythm as the needle dipped and rose through the layers of fabric, creating something tangible, something real, stitch by stitch, dipped and rose, dipped and rose. It felt grounding, tactile, blessedly real. Not pixels, not performance, not digital chaos, just fabric thread, and the quiet, steady passage of time creating something new from disparate pieces. Outside, the streetlights buzzed to life, casting pools of yellow light on the empty street. Across the street, I could see the neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, sitting together on their porch swing, wrapped in blankets and jackets against the cool air, talking low. Their voices a gentle murmur in the quiet evening, a small island of human connection. And somewhere not far from me in Maple Glen, Pennsylvania, I knew a girl sat in a room lit only by a screen, seeing herself perhaps for the very first time, reflected not through a filter. She chose not through the eyes of her peers seeking validation, but through the unvarnished lens of someone who loved her enough to dare to look closely, to dare to intervene. By morning, the storm had arrived fully, not in the sky over Madison, Wisconsin, where I had recently moved, seeking a quiet place near nature, a place near lakes and trails, a place I hoped might feel like home eventually. The weather remained cool and dry, the sky a pale, indifferent blue, the air crisp. But the storm was raging nonetheless, a digital tempest, tearing through the screens that governed everyone's lives, reaching beyond my small network into the wider world. There was no thunder, no lightning, no dramatic downpour, just the quiet, persistent buzz of digital fury, the ripple effect of my post spreading far beyond my control. My phone, retrieved from the drawer, began vibrating almost the moment I touched it, before I'd even finished pouring my first cup of coffee. It rattled against the counter, insistent and angry like a hornet trapped in a glass jar, desperate to escape and sting. I didn't look at it right away. I moved through my morning the way I always did. Slow, steady, intentional, a deliberate anchoring in routine amidst the external chaos. I folded the dish towel, neatly opened the blinds in the living room, letting the pale morning light spill across the hardwood floor, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, the quiet accumulation of undisturbed life. I fed the cat a rescue. I had recently adopted a quiet creature who asked for little but warmth and food, a soft presence in the house. I toasted a slice of good sourdough bread and smeared it with homemade peach preserves, a small taste of sweetness. I sat at the kitchen table and ate it slowly without rush in the quiet of my apartment, while the phone continued its angry buzzing on the counter, a physical manifestation of the digital storm. At 7:42 a.m., there was a sharp, urgent knock at the door. Not the light tap of the mailman, not the familiar rap of a neighbor. This was insistent, demanding a sound of someone seeking entry with purpose. It was Theo. I opened the door and saw the strain in his face, etched deep by a sleepless night, before he even spoke. He looked tired, his clothes slightly rumpled like he had dressed in a hurry. He stood with his hands clenched tightly in his jacket pockets, his shoulders stiff, his jaw set in a grim line. His jaw moved once-twice, as if trying to shape a sentence to find the right words to begin. And failing. He didn't raise his voice, not at first. He didn't ask to come in. He simply set his voice low and tight raw, with emotion. "We need to talk, Mom. Now." I stepped aside, opening the door wider. He walked past me into the kitchen, his movements stiff, his gaze avoiding mine initially, and sat heavily in the chair I had just vacated, the chair still warm from my presence. I made him coffee without asking, the familiar ritual of grinding beans, brewing, pouring a strange counterpoint to the tension filling the room. He didn't thank me for the coffee. He didn't make small talk. He immediately launched into a torrent of questions and accusations, his voice tight-controlled, but the anger simmering beneath the surface. Why had I done it? Why now? Why hadn't I come to him, first to Julia? Why had I gone public? Why had I embarrassed his daughter? Why had I betrayed their trust, the trust of our family? I listened to every question, every accusation, every raw word fueled by fear and anger, and perhaps a dawning, unwelcome sense of guilt. I watched his hand shake slightly as he gripped the warm ceramic mug I had placed in front of him, the coffee untouched. I let the silence stretch long between us after he finished speaking, allowing the weight of his words and the silence that followed to settle, allowing him to see that I was not going to defend myself with anger. Then, drawing on the same quiet strength I had found in the digital shadows, the strength of knowing my truth and my purpose, I told him everything. I told him what I had seen describing the Finsta, the reckless content, the patterns of behavior I had observed. I told him what I had saved, showing him on my laptop screen, briefly, clinically, a few of the screenshots, a few of the video clips. Not the most damning, but enough to illustrate the reality. I told him what I had read with my own eyes, not from second-hand gossip or assumptions, but from Tracy's own posts, her own words, her own carefully constructed and unconstructed performances. I told him how many nights I had sat alone in my kitchen, watching her unravel herself, one image, one video, one comment at a time, my fear and concern growing with each post. I told him about the cruelty I had witnessed, the recklessness, the hints of danger that had terrified me. He interrupted again and again, his voice rising, trying to deflect to control the narrative. He said I should have come to him, that this should have stayed in the family, that I had humiliated Tracy in front of her peers, her school, potentially the wider world. But I held firm. I looked him in the eye, my voice calm and steady, refusing to be drawn into his panic. And I asked him the question hanging heavy between us. Theo, what does in the family mean when no one is paying attention to what's happening inside it, when the people who are supposed to be watching are looking elsewhere? I asked him when the last time was that he looked beyond the surface of his daughter's life, beyond the curated public profile. She showed the world beyond the easy answers she gave them. I asked him if he knew the person she was pretending to be online, the risks she was taking, the company she was keeping. He had no answer to that. He fell silent again, his gaze dropping to the mug in his hands, his face a mask of pain and dawning realization. He left without finishing his coffee, the untouched mug, a small, sad symbol of the conversation's incompleteness, of the unresolved issues that still lay between us. Later that morning, Julia called. Her voice was clipped and sharp, a blade cutting through the quiet of my apartment, devoid of the polished realtor's charm. She didn't ask questions. She made accusations. She told me I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, that I had traumatized Tracy, that I had no idea what it was like raising a teenager in this day and age, implying my old-fashioned views and methods were destructive and out of touch. I could hear the fear beneath the anger, the panic of a parent whose carefully constructed image of their family was cracking. Today I let her speak. I listened to the torrent of her anger, her fear, her defensiveness. I didn't argue. There was no point. She wasn't calling to understand my perspective or to find a way forward. She was calling to defend, to contain the damage, to protect the image of a family that was already fractured, already struggling beneath the weight of its own unspoken truths. After that call, the last direct communication I received from them. For a while, Tracy blocked me. Not just on Instagram, where I had posted the images, but everywhere she could. Phone number, email, any other social media platforms she thought I might find her on. My name, my connection to her was actively erased from her digital presence, removed from her contacts, scrubbed clean. My comments on old posts were deleted. I became the villain in a narrative she didn't write, but one she felt forced to finish, to control, to define me as. I began receiving messages from people I didn't know. Comments on the now viral post, messages sent directly to my account from strangers who had seen it shared. Some praised me, called me brave. A hero said they wished their own parents or grandparents had the courage to speak up the way I had about similar situations with their own children or grandchildren. They shared their own stories of watching helplessness, of regret. Others scolded me angrily, said I had betrayed trust, that I was cruel, calculating, vindictive, that I had permanently damaged my relationship with my granddaughter for the sake of a public spectacle for attention. I didn't respond to any of them. The post kept spreading, picked up by local blogs, then parenting groups shared and debated on forums and social media platforms across the country. A high school teacher I used to work with saw it and shared it, adding a comment about accountability and the dangers of parental silence in the digital age. The image I had carefully curated, the message I had carefully crafted, had become untethered from my control. It was no longer mine. Not really. It belonged to the digital wind swirling through the vast, unpredictable landscape of the internet, sparking discussions, anger, and unexpected connections. At noon, amidst the persistent buzzing of my phone, I made a decision. I turned off all notifications from all apps. I shut down the Instagram app completely and placed my phone in the drawer by the sink, next to the yellow legal pad filled with notes on Tracy's online life. I needed a break from the noise, from the feedback from the storm that was raging outside the quiet walls of my apartment. I needed to reconnect with something tangible. I went for a walk through Vilas Park, a beautiful park near my apartment in Madison, known for its trails and its zoo. The sky was overcast, a soft diffused light filtering through the clouds, the air cool and crisp. The ducks were gathering near the pond, paddling calmly, seemingly indifferent to the digital drama unfolding elsewhere. I sat on a bench by the water and watched the world exist without hashtags, without updates, without likes or comments. A world moving at a different pace. It was a strange relief, a return to a fundamental reality. I thought about Tracy. I imagined her curled up in her room, curtains drawn against the world, her face pale and clenched, scrolling through the reactions to the post, feeling exposed, hurt, angry, perhaps confused. I didn't want her to be hurting. I didn't want to break her spirit, to shatter her. I only wanted her to see herself clearly, to pause long enough to feel the weight of what she'd been putting out into the world, to stop performing for an audience, and start thinking about who she was, who she wanted to be, what she valued. That night, no one called. No one came over. The house was still quiet, the silence different from the emptiness of the past. It wasn't the silence of avoidance, but the silence after a storm, a space where things could settle, where truth could begin its work. I moved through it like someone waiting for the necessary rain after a long, hot fire. The anticipation heavy but necessary for growth. I heated up a bowl of soup, ate it while standing at the kitchen counter, the silence amplifying the sound of my spoon against the ceramic bowl. I turned the lights off early and went to bed. The quiet wasn't peaceful, not yet, not fully, but it felt honest. And honesty, even when it storms, even when it breaks things, always leaves room for something to grow eventually. The fallout didn't come all at once, a single decisive event that theoed a clear end and beginning. It rolled in slowly like fog over the lake near my house in Madison, settling into the landscape of our relationships, changing the way we navigated the familiar terrain. At first, after the initial explosion of the post and the backlash and the silence that followed, it seemed like things might simply go quiet again, that perhaps after the chaos, everything would dissolve into that numb kind of forgetting families sometimes lean on when the truth is too uncomfortable, too messy to confront head-on. But forgetting is a luxury reserved for people who weren't paying attention in the first place, for those who weren't deeply invested. I had been paying attention for too long, watching too closely, caring too much to pretend now. I had seen too much to unsee it, and I had felt too much to simply let it go. It was the Monday after Thanksgiving when I saw Tracy again in person. It had been a week since the post went viral, a week of silence from them, of unanswered calls on their end of block numbers and closed doors, both literal and metaphorical. Theo texted me the night before a short, blunt message, just like his questions on the morning he arrived. Said they'd be stopping by after school the next day. He didn't ask if it was a good time. He didn't explain why they were coming. He simply stated it like a weather report, a fact of the day, a scheduled event. The knock came promptly at 4:10 p.m., the sound sharp and clear in the late afternoon quiet of my apartment building. I opened the door and saw her first. Tracy, standing slightly behind her father, hesitant, her usual teenage swagger gone. No makeup on today, her face scrubbed clean. Her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, not styled or colored. Shoulders hunched smaller than I had seen them in a long time, like she'd been trying to disappear from the world for days. Her eyes, usually so quick, so expressive, didn't rise to meet mine. They were fixed on the doormat, on the familiar pattern of the rug. Theo stood behind her, his presence less commanding than usual, his hands buried deep in his jacket pockets, his stance rigid. He looked like he had aged a year since I saw him last. The lines around his eyes deeper, his mouth set in a grim line. He looked tired, defeated, and perhaps humbled by the events of the past week. I stepped aside to let them in, opening the door wide in a gesture of quiet welcome. No words were exchanged in the doorway. Tracy walked past me into the living room, her footsteps quiet on the hardwood floor, so different from her usual confident stride. Theo followed his gaze, still avoiding mine. Initially, his movement slow. Tracy walked to the couch and sat on the very edge, stiff and fidgeting, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, a picture of nervous energy contained. Theo walked to the window and stood there, looking out at the street, his back partly to me, a familiar posture of avoidance. I walked to my usual armchair across from the couch and sat down, settling into the familiar comfort of the worn fabric. For a long time, no one spoke. The air in the room was thick with unspoken things. Fear, anger, hurt, regret, confusion, maybe even a sliver of understanding. It was full of static, as if even the furniture understood the weight of what hung between us, what had been forced into the light. Tracy didn't apologize. I didn't expect her to, not yet, maybe, not ever, in a way that felt complete. Apologies are complex things requiring a level of self-awareness and vulnerability that takes time to develop, time she was only just beginning to have. She didn't cry, not visibly, but her lip trembled once when she tried to speak, a small sound escaping her throat, before she swallowed it back, failing to shape the words. Theo cleared his throat, finally breaking the heavy silence, his voice rough, strained. He spoke haltingly at first, then gaining a little momentum, reciting words that sounded rehearsed, perhaps discussed with Julia. He said something about wanting to move forward, about understanding each other better, about the need for boundaries in relationships both online and off. He used the word family a lot, repeating it like a mantra, as if reminding us all what was at stake, what we were fighting for, or perhaps against. He used the word mistake, only once referring vaguely to mistakes that were made, leaving it deliberately ambiguous as to whose mistakes he meant. Tracy's online actions, my public intervention, or perhaps his and Julia's distraction and lack of attention. I listened. I nodded occasionally, acknowledging that I heard him. I said very little in response to his monologue, not because I had nothing to say. My mind was overflowing with thoughts and feelings, but because sometimes silence says what words can't. It forces others to fill the space to confront the quiet truth of a situation without the distraction of immediate debate or defense. And I wanted Tracy to sit in that silence, to feel the shape of it, to understand on a deeper level than words could convey that my intervention, painful as it was, had stemmed from a place of deep caring, not cruelty. When they left after another long period of quiet, punctuated only by Theo's strained voice and Tracy's silence, it was just as abrupt as their arrival. Tracy stood when Theo did. She didn't hug me, didn't say goodbye, verbally. But as she turned to walk out the door, her eyes lifted just for a second and our eyes met across the short distance. There was something in her gaze. Vulnerability, hurt. Resentment, yes. But also something else, a flicker of understanding, perhaps a grudging acknowledgement, a recognition of the person who had dared to see her, truly see her, even when it was painful. It was a fleeting moment easily missed, but I saw it. That was enough. Enough to know that the door wasn't closed permanently. Later that week, after they had gone back to Maple Glen, I reopened my phone. I hadn't logged into Instagram since the night of the post, had avoided the platform entirely, needing distance from the noise and the fallout. I had expected a wasteland. Hundreds of unfollows, a comment section filled with debate and vitriol, a digital ghost town where I was persona non grata. But something else had happened. The original post was still there, though. I had archived the original screenshots, removing the images of Tracy, and leaving only the black square with my caption, "We become what we post." Every word, every gesture, every joke we make in public says more than we realize. Maybe it's time someone said it back. There were comments now, dozens, maybe hundreds, from strangers, from acquaintances, from old students who had somehow found the account and recognized my name, my history. Some were angry, yes, debating the ethics of my actions, arguing about privacy and consequences. But many, surprisingly, were grateful. They shared their own stories about daughters, sons, grandsons, friends who had slipped away into online versions of themselves they no longer recognized, about the pain of watching, the difficulty of intervening, the regret of staying silent. Some were just there to listen, leaving quiet notes of support, creating a small, unexpected community. I read them all sitting in my quiet living room in Madison, a silent audience to the unexpected connections that had gathered around my difficult truth. I didn't reply to any of them. The post had taken on a life of its own, sparking conversations I couldn't control, but which felt important nonetheless. A week later, without a word, without any notification, Tracy unblocked me on Instagram. No message, no explanation, just the quiet digital action. A door quietly opened a crack. Suddenly I could see her stories again, her posts, her profile. Something had changed. The images were different now. Less polished, less performative, more mundane, more real. A photo of her cat curled up in a patch of sunlight on the rug. A picture of the fall leaves scattered on the steps outside her school. A blurry shot of her bedroom ceiling with the simple, unadorned caption, "Slow day." She was quieter online now, sharing less, performing, less reaching out, less frantically for attention. She seemed smaller somehow, not in the way that meant defeated or diminished, but in the way that meant human, vulnerable perhaps, but real. It felt like a beginning, a tentative step back towards authenticity, or perhaps just a pause in the relentless performance. Julia never reached out again directly, not since that angry phone call. I wasn't surprised. She had always been the type to confuse confrontation with betrayal, to prioritize appearance and control over messy emotional realities. She had retreated into her own world behind her own carefully constructed boundaries. I held no resentment toward her. She was doing what she thought she had to do, protecting her daughter, protecting her family's image, reacting out of her own fear and pain just as I had reacted out of mine. We all were just doing what we thought was necessary to survive, to protect what we held dear. Theo called occasionally. His calls were different now too. Less rushed, less focused on superficial updates about work or the house. He asked how I was genuinely taking the time to listen to the answer. He said he missed my cooking, a small familiar bridge between our past and present. I invited him over for dinner the next time he was free. Told him I'd make rosemary biscuits his favorite. He didn't come, not right away. He had an excuse, a scheduling conflict. But I heard the intention in his voice, the desire to reconnect, to rebuild, even if he wasn't quite ready or able to fully bridge the distance yet. And sometimes I was learning that's enough to wait for. Progress isn't always measured in grand gestures, but in small, persistent intentions. December came early that year. The first snow dusted the ground by the second week, transforming the familiar landscape outside my window into something quiet and magical, softening the edges of the world. I hung my old winter wreath on the door, its faux pine needles dusted with glittering snow, a small act of welcoming, a signal of continuity. I spent more time baking the kitchen warm and fragrant with spices, the physical act of measuring and mixing and waiting a comforting routine. I donated half the apple pies I made to the local shelter, a quiet act of giving back. I froze the rest, knowing there would be other Sunday dinners, other opportunities for shared meals, even if they weren't the same as they used to be. I started writing again. Not legal briefs or arguments for a jury, but small essays, notes, fragments of thought, memories, observations, things I hadn't made room for in years, sidelined by the demanding trajectory of my career, then by grief, then by the unexpected drama of the past year. I kept a notebook beside my bed, a simple bound volume filling its pages with memories of my childhood, of Arthur, of Tracy as a toddler, her small hand holding mine as she learned to walk, of the complex trial I won in 1993. That felt like the pinnacle of my career, but that no one in my family ever asked me about a whole part of my life that remained largely unseen by them until now, perhaps. I didn't know what our relationship with Tracy, with Theo, with Julia would look like going forward. I didn't pretend things would go back to the way they were before the post, before the storm hit. They shouldn't. That past-based, partly on illusion and unspoken truths, on my willing invisibility was gone. But something new was opening. A door, a window, a space between us that wasn't based on performance or punishment, but on a difficult shared truth, a vulnerability that had been forced into the light, acknowledged in the quiet aftermath. And if she ever chose to step into that space fully, if she ever chose to talk to truly connect beyond the screen, I would be there. Not as a follower anymore, not as a silent audience to a carefully curated performance, not as a quiet old woman fading into the background, easily dismissed, easily made invisible, but as myself, Margaret L. Hart, always watching. Yes, but with love, not surveillance, seeing the person, not just the performance, always listening not just to the words, but to the silence between them, to the subtext, always waiting for her to remember, or perhaps to realize for the first time that I was never invisible. Not really. Not where it truly counted. It had been almost 2 months since the post, since the storm had passed through our quiet neighborhood and left behind a different kind of silence. Not the cold, avoiding kind we had all grown so good at, the one that filled the spaces where connection should have been the one that made me feel unseen, but something else, something more open, more watchful, more accepting of complexity, like walking into a room where someone had just spoken a difficult truth out loud, and now nobody quite knew what to do next. Everyone waiting, watching, listening for the next word, the next move, the next gesture. I wasn't using the old Instagram account anymore, the one where I had posted the images that sparked the reckoning. I had left it up, left the black square, and my caption there as a quiet "Theo-er," a testament to a moment, but I no longer posted there. It had served its purpose. That account had been a mirror one I had held up when no one else would, a temporary tool for a specific painful task. It didn't feel like mine anymore. It belonged to the moment, to the fallout, to the public conversation, to the reckoning. So I made a new one, a different kind of account, one that felt like an extension of my real, quiet life, not a tool for intervention or a stage for performance. I created it on a quiet morning just after New Year's. The sky was unusually clear for January in Wisconsin, a pale, washed-out blue, and the pine trees in the backyard looked etched in crystal, dusted with frost, beautiful in their starkness. I had taken my morning walk through Buffalo Park, the frozen ground crunching under my boots. Breathed in the frost-hardened air that cleared, the mind watched a hawk circle above the canyon, ridge its movements effortless, free soaring without apparent struggle. Something about the way it hovered, suspended without effort, made me feel ready to begin again to create something new, unburdened by the weight of the past, by the need for validation. I sat at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, the warmth seeping into my hand's phone in hand, and tapped, "Create new account." I used my name again, but softer this time, less formal. The name I preferred the name Arthur used. Just Maggie Hart. No middle initial, no cryptic username, no attempt at cleverness or branding. I uploaded a photo taken a few weeks before by a friend I'd made in Madison, a woman I met through a gardening club. It was one where I stood near the fence line behind the house, wrapped in my flannel coat, against the cold, looking out at the snow-covered fields, stretching towards the lake, smiling without knowing someone was taking my picture. It felt like a genuine moment, captured unaware, a true reflection of peace found. The bio was simple, a quiet introduction. Retired lawyer, amateur gardener, full-time observer. It felt honest. It felt like me. This account wasn't for Tracy, not directly, anyway. Not with a specific purpose in mind. It wasn't for Theo or Julia. It wasn't for proving anything or exposing anything or reminding anyone what they had forgotten. It was for me. A place to share glimpses of my own quiet, tangible world, the things I noticed, the things I cared about, to connect with others who appreciated the same. I started slow, a photo of my tulip bulb starting to break through the frozen dirt in the pot on the windowsill, a tiny, persistent promise of spring amidst the winter. A close-up of the sourdough loaf I had managed not to burn that morning, its crust golden and cracked steam rising from the cuts, a small, satisfying domestic victory. A short video clip of the wind chimes on my porch during a sudden rainstorm, the sound delicate and soft and clean against the drumming rain on the roof, a moment of simple beauty. To my surprise, people followed. Not hundreds, not strangers drawn in by viral reposts and drama, but just quiet accounts, other older women mostly. Women in their 60s and 70s finding their own space online. A retired librarian from Oregon who posted pictures of her cats and the books she was reading. A widowed nurse from Minnesota who shared recipes and photos of the intricate quilts she was making. A woman in Georgia who wrote short, poignant poems about her dogs and crocheted blankets for NICU babies. They found me somehow, perhaps through mutual followers or the subtle algorithms of the platform, and they sent little messages. Nothing heavy, nothing demanding, just comments that felt like real conversation, quiet observations shared across the distance. Love this view. Reminds me of my grandmother's kitchen. My daffodils haven't bloomed yet either. It was connection without performance community built on shared quiet moments rather than curated highlights or dramatic pronouncements. It felt like discovering a secret room that had always existed filled with kindred spirits, but no one had ever invited me into before, a space where authenticity was valued over attention. Tracy hadn't followed the new account. I didn't expect her to. She hadn't said much since that one visit after Thanksgiving. A few texts here and there, short, surface-level responses. to things I sent small acknowledgements of connection. A birthday card in the mail in January with "Love you" written inside in her sharp, straight letters, the words familiar but feeling new, somehow tentative, a carefully offered gesture. We were still rebuilding carefully, like stacking stones in a shallow creek, testing the balance of each one before adding the next, knowing that a single wrong move could send them tumbling down. Each small moment of connection had to balance, or everything would shift back to silence. But I noticed her watching. She didn't like posts. She didn't comment. She didn't interact publicly. But sometimes, scrolling through the list of who had viewed my stories, those brief, ephemeral posts that disappear after 24 hours, her name would appear. Tracy Hayes. She watched my tulip bulbs break through the frozen dirt. She watched the pie crust I floured and folded on my counter. She watched the sourdough loaf rise. She watched the sunrise over the canyon rim from my backyard, a view I often shared. She watched quietly from a distance, an unseen observer herself for a change, and that, for now, was enough. It was a form of connection, a silent bridge across the space between us, a sign of engagement, of curiosity. The new account became a kind of journal, a way to record my days, to remember who I was, when no one was asking me questions, when I was simply living. I shared memories sometimes, brief ones tied to objects or places. A photo of my first courtroom badge, its metal-worn, smoothed by years of touch. The battered leather briefcase I carried for years and never replaced. A ticket stub from a Miles Davis concert in 1977. A brief caption mentioning the year, letting the image speak for itself. I didn't explain them. Didn't add long explanatory captions. I just let them sit there like pebbles placed along a path. The hours of a life lived, a history I carried, inviting quiet reflection, not demanding attention. And then one afternoon in late February, it happened. I had posted a photo of my mother's ring, a simple gold band with a small garnet set in the center. A ring she had worn every day since she was married. A ring I had worn every day since she died. Its cool metal, a constant comfort on my finger. I had taken the photo in the sunlight on my windowsill, the garnet glowing red. The caption read simply, "She taught me how to speak softly and still be heard." And Tracy commented, just one word, "Beautiful." No emoji, no sarcasm, no teenage slang. Just that single word, simple, direct, real. It sat there beneath the photo, a small unexpected breadcrumb dropped on the path between us, a sign that she had seen, that she had heard, that something had resonated. I didn't reply. I didn't want to crowd it, to demand more, to break the fragile moment. I just left it there. Let her know I saw it, that I understood the quiet reach. It represented the message it contained. A few days later, scrolling through my feed, I saw that Tracy had posted a photo of the desert sky at dusk, muted purples and oranges blending together, a quiet, reflective image. Her caption said, "Trying to slow down." And for the first time in a long time, reading her words online, it didn't feel like she was performing for an audience. It felt like she meant it. A genuine reflection of an internal shift, a quiet acknowledgement of a need for change, for a different pace. I followed her again on Instagram, this time from my Maggie Hart account. She didn't follow back, not right away, but she didn't block me either. And that, too, was enough. Progress wasn't a straight line, wasn't a sudden dramatic reconciliation or a flood of apologies. It was a series of small tentative steps, a quiet rerouting, a mutual acknowledgement of existence and change. Sometimes bridges aren't rebuilt exactly as they were. Sometimes they're rerouted stone by stone, moment by moment, through quieter places, through new accounts, through shared silent observations of sunsets and gardens and old rings. You can feel sorry for me if you like, for the pain of feeling invisible, for the betrayal of trust, for the difficult, painful choice I had to make to intervene in my granddaughter's life. You can judge me, call me cruel, say I went too far, that I broke sacred boundaries. Or you can see yourself in this story. See the fear of becoming irrelevant, of being invisible in a world that values constant visibility. See the struggle to connect across generations and digital divides that seem to widen every day. See the pain of watching someone you love stumble, embrace danger, lose themselves in performance. See the difficult calculus of intervention. The knowledge that sometimes love requires doing the hardest thing. See the quiet resilience required to rebuild a life, to redefine family, to find your voice to be heard and seen when you thought it was all gone. Because this isn't just my story. It's a reckoning, a look in the mirror for me, for Tracy, perhaps for others. It's about the consequences of our actions online and off. And it's not over yet. The lines are still being written, stitch by stitch, stone by stone, post by post, quiet moment by quiet moment. The future is unwritten, but it is being built. If this story resonated with your soul, if you felt that sting of invisibility, or that fear of what lies hidden online, if you've grappled with how to connect across divides, perhaps consider supporting content that explores these messy human truths. And let me know in the comments below which city or country you're listening from. I'm truly curious to know where you're tuning in from, what corner of the world you inhabit, while you navigate the complexities of your own story. We're more connected than we often realize, more visible to each other than we know, even when we feel most alone, most invisible.